The air in the ballroom of the Drake Hotel was thick with the scent of white roses and old money. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto hundreds of guests dressed in silk and velvet, their laughter echoing against the high, ornate ceilings. It was the perfect wedding. My sister, Serafina, had demanded nothing less. I stood just inside the arched doorway, clutching a small beaded purse that felt like a stone in my hand. I had spent weeks convincing myself to come, to play the part of the supportive sister one last time, for the sake of peace, for the sake of my father who always looked so tired. If this story touches you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video to help me grow and continue telling stories like this. A smiling attendant directed me to a large gold-framed seating chart resting on an easel. The names were written in elegant, looping calligraphy. I scanned the list for my own. Clara. My eyes followed the line to the table number. Table 21. I looked out over the sea of round tables, each draped in white linen and adorned with towering floral centerpieces. I counted them. 1, 2, 10, 15. The numbers stopped at 20. There was no table 21. A knot of confusion tightened in my stomach. I thought it was a mistake. A simple oversight in the chaos of planning a 300-person wedding. I walked back to the attendant, a young woman with a patient smile. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I think there's an error on the chart. I'm Clara Vance, and it says I'm at table 21, but I only see 20 tables." She took the chart from its stand and studied it. Her brow furrowed. She traced the names with her finger, then flipped to a second, more detailed list she kept on a clipboard. Her professional smile faltered for just a second. It was a tiny crack in her composure, but I saw it. She looked up, avoiding my eyes. "Ah. Yes. Miss Vance. Your seat is just this way. It's a special arrangement." She led me out of the warm, humming ballroom and back into the grand hallway. The marble floor was cool and quiet here. The sounds of the party became a muffled hum behind the heavy wooden doors. She walked past the gift table, past the guest book, and stopped beside a large rack filled with the guests' autumn coats. And there it was. A single, straight-backed chair, identical to the ones inside the ballroom, tucked into a small alcove between the coat rack and a fire extinguisher. On the seat, placed perfectly in the center, was a place card. The same creamy cardstock, the same gold calligraphy, Clara Vance. I froze. The air left my lungs in a single, silent gasp. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an oversight. This was a statement. My seat was not at a table with the other guests. It was not even in the room where my sister was getting married. My seat was in the hallway with the coats. I stood there staring at my name on that card, and a cold, clear understanding washed over me. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't family. I was something to be stored, put away, and kept out of sight. I had been publicly, meticulously, and deliberately erased. Standing in that silent marble hallway, The single chair felt less like furniture and more like a monument to my entire life. The scent of damp wool from the coats and the faint chemical smell of the floor polish filled my senses. The muffled beat of the music from the ballroom was a world away. My mind, however, wasn't in the hallway. It had slipped back in time, tumbling through years of memories that all led to this exact moment. It started with the living room mantel. In our house, the mantel was a shrine to achievement. But it was only ever a shrine to Serafina's achievements. Her first place ribbons from horse shows, a cascade of primary colors, hung in thick, proud bunches. Her silver-plated beauty pageant tiaras glittered under the lamplight. A framed photo of her being crowned Junior Miss Oak Park took center stage. My accomplishments were different. They were quieter. I won the state science fair in 10th grade. My trophy was a modest, heavy thing on a wooden base. My mother, Victoria, said it was lovely before she put it in the glass-fronted cabinet in the dining room, behind the good china we never used. When I won a citywide chess tournament, the plaque was placed on my bedroom bookshelf where no one but me would see it. My things were always put away. Serafina's were put on display. I once tried to add something of my own to the mantel. It was a small framed certificate for perfect attendance. I was 9 years old and so proud of it. I found a small space behind one of Serafina's larger writing trophies and propped it up. The next morning, it was gone. I found it later, tucked inside a book on my nightstand. My mother never said a word. She didn't have to. The message was clear. This space was not for you. But the moment the world truly shifted for me, the moment I understood that I wasn't just the second favorite, but something closer to a ghost in my own home, was when I was 14. I was looking for a photo album in my mother's office. She kept everything meticulously organized on a tall bookshelf. As I scanned the spines, my fingers brushed against a dark, leather-bound notebook. It had no label. I'd never seen it before. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it down. The leather was soft and worn. I opened it. On the first page, in my mother's neat, careful handwriting, it said, "Serafina's Memories." I remember sinking to the floor, my back against the bookshelf. I turned the pages. It was a diary, but not of my mother's life. It was a diary of Serafina's. Every page was filled with anecdotes, milestones, and funny things she'd said. June 4th. Serafina saw a butterfly today and called it a flutterby. Such a clever girl. October 26th. S took her first steps today. Straight into her father's arms. We both cried. May 18th. Had to explain to Serafina why the sky is blue. She asked if the clouds were the sky's pillows. My heart melted. Page after page, year after year, it detailed her first day of school, her first lost tooth, her first crush. My mother had recorded the texture of my sister's life with the loving precision of a historian. I flipped faster, a frantic hope fluttering in my chest. Maybe my name was in there somewhere. Maybe I was on the next page. In the next chapter, I went through the entire book. every single page. My name was mentioned only twice. Once in passing, December 25th, Serafina loved her new dollhouse. But we had to tell Clara not to touch it. And a second time. A few years later, August 12th, S is upset because Clara got a higher grade on her history report. I told her not to worry. That some people are just book smart. I closed the notebook. The silence of the office was deafening. It wasn't just that she preferred Serafina. It was that in the private record of our family's life, I barely existed. My first steps, my first words, my funny questions, they hadn't been worth writing down. They had evaporated into thin air. Unrecorded. Unremembered. It was the discovery that my own mother, the person who was supposed to see me more clearly than anyone, wasn't really watching me at all. I was just background noise in the story of Serafina. This pattern continued my whole life. When I got into Northwestern University on a full academic scholarship, my parents took me out for a quiet dinner. When Serafina, 2 years later, got into a state school, they threw her a huge party for all her friends. My mother's explanation was simple. Well, honey, we always knew you'd get in. We were worried about Serafina. My success was an expectation. Her mediocrity was a cause for celebration. They called me the strong one. Clara can handle it. Clara doesn't need all the fuss. For years, I believed it was a compliment. I thought it meant I was independent and capable. I didn't realize until much later that it was just an excuse. An excuse to give all their time, energy, and attention to Serafina. I wasn't strong. I was just ignored. I didn't need less fuss. I was just given less. I had learned to be my own parent, my own cheerleader, my own witness, because no one else in my family was willing to take on the job. So, as I stood in the hallway staring at that chair, it felt like the final, perfect summary of my life. They hadn't forgotten me. They had remembered me enough to create a special, separate place for me. A place that was outside, out of sight, and out of mind. It was the leather notebook all over again. But this time, it was on public display. The initial shock in the hallway began to burn off, leaving behind the cold, hard residue of anger. Not a hot, screaming anger, but a deep, quiet rage that had been simmering for 28 years. For a moment, I considered just leaving. I could turn around, walk out the front door of the hotel, and disappear from their lives forever. It would be so easy. But something held me there. I needed to hear them say it. I needed to see their faces when they confirmed that this cruelty was intentional. I wouldn't give them the convenience of my silent disappearance. They were going to have to look me in the eye. I took a deep breath, tucked the place card into my purse, and walked back into the ballroom. The warmth and noise hit me like a physical wave. I scanned the room, a sea of smiling, laughing faces, and felt a profound sense of alienation. These people all belonged here. I was an intruder. I spotted my mother, Victoria, standing near the towering 7-tiered wedding cake. She was talking to an aunt, her posture perfect, a champagne flute held elegantly in her hand. She looked like the proud mother of the bride. She looked like a complete stranger. I walked toward her, my steps feeling strangely heavy on the plush carpet. My aunt saw me approaching and her face lit up. "Clara. There you are. We were wondering where you'd gotten to." My mother turned. Her smile was a practiced, perfect thing, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were cool, assessing. "Hello, Clara," she said, her tone polite, as if I were a distant cousin she barely knew. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice low and even. I didn't want a scene. I just wanted an answer. "Can I talk to you for a second?" She excused herself from our aunt and let me lead her a few feet away, to a small space behind a pillar draped in white fabric. The music was a little quieter here. I opened my purse and took out the place card. I held it out for her to see. "Why am I seated outside in the hallway?" I asked. The question was simple, direct. There was no accusation in my tone, only a request for information. She glanced at the card, then back at me. There was no flicker of surprise in her expression, no confusion, no concern that her daughter had been grievously insulted. There was only a cold, hard impatience. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Clara, don't make things difficult," she said, her voice a low hiss. "It's not a difficult question. Mom, my chair is next to the coat rack. I just want to know why." She took a small sip of her champagne, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. Then she looked straight at me, her gaze as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass. "Be grateful you're even invited." The words landed with a quiet, devastating finality. There it was. The truth, stripped of all pretense. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a punishment for some crime I didn't even know I had committed. Or maybe it was just a final confirmation of my status. I was an obligation, not a daughter. My presence was a chore to be managed, not a joy to be celebrated. Before I could even process the cruelty of her words, a cloud of white tulle and glittering lace descended upon us. It was Serafina, my sister, the bride. She looked radiant, her hair swept up in an intricate knot, diamonds sparkling at her ears. She was smiling, but the smile was a weapon. "What's going on over here?" she asked, her voice light and bubbly, the sound of fake innocence. She saw the place card in my hand. Her eyes widened in mock surprise. "Oh my gosh. Is that your card?" she gasped. "Let me see." She took it from my numb fingers. She stared at it, her perfectly shaped eyebrows knitting together in a performance of deep concern. "In the hallway? No. That can't be right. The wedding planner must have completely messed this up. I am so sorry. Clara. This is mortifying." She looked mortified. She sounded mortified. But her eyes, when they met mine over the top of the card, told a different story. They were glittering, not with unshed tears of embarrassment, but with pure, unadulterated victory. She had done this. She had planned this. This was her masterpiece of humiliation, and she was savoring my reaction. The smirk was hidden behind her concerned expression, but I could feel it. It was in the triumphant sparkle in her eyes. I stood there, trapped between my mother's cold dismissal and my sister's triumphant deception. The noise of the party faded into a dull roar in my ears. I felt the familiar weight of years of this treatment settle on my shoulders. Say something. A voice in my head screamed. Call her out. Expose the lie. But I couldn't. My throat was tight, choked with a grief so old and so deep I had no words for it. What would be the point? They would deny it. They would call me jealous, dramatic, ungrateful. They would turn it around and make me the villain for ruining Serafina's special day. It was a game I had played 100 times before, and I had never won. So, I swallowed it. I swallowed the humiliation, the rage, and the pain. I felt it go down like a jagged stone, lodging itself deep in my chest. I looked at Serafina, at her perfect dress and her perfect smile and the ugly triumph in her eyes. It's okay, I said, and my own voice sounded distant and hollow. Don't worry about it. I watched her relief, the way her shoulders relaxed now that the threat of a scene had passed. She patted my arm condescendingly. I'll go sort this out with the planner right now. We'll find a place for you. She glided away, a vision in white, leaving me alone with my mother behind the pillar. Victoria gave me one last warning look. Don't you dare ruin this for your sister, she whispered, before turning and melting back into the crowd. I stood there for a long time, watching them both work the room, laughing and accepting congratulations. They were the perfect family, and I was the secret they kept in the hall. I retreated to the edge of the ballroom, finding a small empty space near a service door. I felt like a ghost watching a party I wasn't really attending. Guests mingled, champagne flowed, and a string quartet played something light and classical. From the outside, it was a picture of flawless elegance. But from where I stood, the whole scene felt brittle, like a thin veneer of civility stretched over something ugly and rotten, my family's specialty. I leaned against the wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. I just wanted to be invisible. If they were going to put me in the hallway, I might as well act the part. I watched Serafina hold court in the center of the room, her laughter loud and performative. I saw my mother moving from table to table, her smile never wavering, accepting compliments on the wedding, on her beautiful daughter. No one would ever guess the coldness that lived just beneath that polished surface. My gaze drifted across the room, and for a second, I locked eyes with someone. It was a woman with salt and pepper hair cut in a chic, elegant bob. She was wearing a sophisticated navy blue dress, her posture radiating a quiet confidence. I recognized her from the rehearsal dinner, Beatrice Sterling. Julian's mother. She wasn't smiling. While everyone around her was engaged in loud, cheerful conversation, she was perfectly still, watching. Her expression wasn't sad or angry. It was observant. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and they missed nothing. I realized with a jolt that she had been standing in a position where she could have seen the entire exchange between me, my mother, and Serafina behind the pillar. As soon as our eyes met, I looked away, embarrassed. I didn't want pity. The last thing I needed was for my sister's new mother-in-law to see the pathetic family drama unfolding. I stared down at my shoes, wishing the floor would swallow me whole. I waited a few moments before daring to look up again. Beatrice was no longer looking at me. She was watching Serafina. Her gaze was steady and analytical, like a scientist observing a specimen. She watched as Serafina threw her head back in a peal of laughter that didn't quite seem genuine. She watched as Serafina dismissed a waiter with an impatient flick of her wrist when he offered her a glass of water instead of champagne. She watched as my mother smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from Serafina's dress, her expression one of pure adoration. Beatrice saw all of it. Then her eyes moved and found mine again across the crowded room. This time, I didn't look away. We just looked at each other for a long moment. There was no judgment in her gaze, no pity. There was something else, something I hadn't received from anyone in this room, or in my family, for a very long time. Recognition. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a tiny gesture, so subtle that anyone else would have missed it. But it wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. It wasn't a nod of greeting. It was a nod that said, "I see it. I see what they are doing. You are not crazy." A wave of relief so powerful it almost made my knees buckle washed over me. For my entire life, I had felt like I was living in a different reality from everyone else. I saw the cruelty, the manipulation, the casual disregard, while everyone else saw a perfect, happy family. I was constantly questioning my own perceptions. Was I too sensitive? Was I imagining things? Was I, as my mother so often told me, just being difficult? But that one small nod from a near stranger cut through decades of self-doubt. It was a lifeline thrown across a sea of isolation. Someone else saw it. Someone else saw through the act. Beatrice Sterling, with her calm, steady gaze, recognized cruelty disguised as a seating arrangement. She recognized manipulation dressed up in a wedding gown. Later, as the guests were being called to their tables for dinner, I found myself standing near the bar, trying to decide if I should order a drink or just slip out the door. Weddings can be very revealing, can't they? I turned. It was Beatrice. She was standing beside me, ordering a club soda with lime. Her voice was calm and low. "I suppose they can be," I said, my own voice a little shaky. She took her drink from the bartender and turned to face me. Her eyes were kind, but still incredibly sharp. "My son is a good man," she said, seemingly out of nowhere. He sees the best in people, sometimes to a fault. It was a simple statement, but I understood the weight behind it. It wasn't an accusation against me. It was a warning and a shared observation. She was telling me she knew her son was marrying into a family with dark, hidden corners. And she was telling me she knew I lived in those corners, too. He is. I agreed quietly. Julian is a very good man. She gave me another one of her small, meaningful looks. I hope he'll be happy. She said it like a question, as if she were hoping I could reassure her. But we both knew I couldn't. She touched my arm gently. A brief, warm gesture. I'm glad you're here, Clara. And then she walked away toward her table, leaving me standing at the bar. She had said, I'm glad you're here. Not, I'm sorry about your seat or your sister is being a monster. It was more subtle and more powerful. She wasn't just acknowledging my pain. She was acknowledging my presence. In a room where my own family had worked so hard to make me disappear. Julian's mother had made me feel seen. And for the first time all night, I felt a flicker of something other than pain. It was a tiny spark of strength. The dinner service began. Waiters moved through the room with synchronized grace, placing plates of seared scallops and risotto before the guests. Laughter and conversation rose to a crescendo. I found a spot on a cushioned bench in a small alcove just outside the main dining area. The place card still tucked away in my purse. I hadn't been offered another seat, and I hadn't asked for one. I just sat watching the wedding from the periphery, an audience of one. I assumed that was how the rest of my night would go in quiet. Self-imposed exile. But about halfway through the main course, I saw Julian, the groom, stand up from the head table. He smiled and said something to Serafina, who was busy talking to her maid of honor. He scanned the room, his eyes moving past the tables, searching. Then he saw me. His polite smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. He started walking toward me. My heart started to beat a little faster. I had always liked Julian. He was a kind, steady, genuine person, everything my sister was not. In the 2 years they'd been dating, he had always made an effort with me. At his own wedding, I saw you weren't at a table, he said. I asked Serafina about it. She said there was a mix-up and that you preferred to sit out here, that you were feeling a little overwhelmed. I just stared at him. The lie was so effortless, so plausible. Of course, Serafina had told him that. She had painted me as the difficult, antisocial sister who had chosen her own isolation. It was brilliant in its own twisted way. Is that true? He asked, finally turning to look at me. His eyes were searching my face for the truth. Are you okay? For a second, the old habit kicked in. Just agree. Don't make trouble. Protect the family. It was a reflex that had been drilled into me for nearly 3 decades. It was my primary function, to absorb the ugliness and keep the surface smooth and calm for everyone else. But then I thought of my mother's cold words. I thought of Serafina's triumphant smirk. I thought of Beatrice's knowing nod. And I was just so tired. I was tired of protecting the people who consistently and deliberately hurt me. I was tired of being the keeper of secrets that were poisoning me. I looked at this kind man who was about to legally bind his life to my sister's. And I couldn't bring myself to tell him another lie. He must have seen the conflict in my face. He leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Does she ever talk about me differently when I'm not around? Does she say things? His unease was palpable. This wasn't a random question. Something had happened. He had seen or heard something that had planted a seed of doubt. He was coming to me, the family outcast, for confirmation. He knew I would have no reason to lie for her. I thought about all the things I'd heard. Serafina on the phone with a friend, laughing about how whipped Julian was. Serafina complaining about his family, calling them boring and old money. Serafina bragging about the size of the diamond on her finger and how she finally trained him to buy the right things. I could have told him all of it. I could have opened the floodgates and drowned him in the truth. But I saw the desperation in his eyes, and I knew I didn't need to. He wasn't looking for a list of grievances. He was looking for permission to believe his own gut. I chose my words carefully. I wouldn't be cruel, but I would be honest. Julian, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I think the person you see when you're looking at her isn't always the person who is there when you turn your back. He didn't flinch. He just stared at me, his expression shifting from suspicion to a dawning, devastating understanding. He had known. He had suspected. He just needed someone else to say it was real. He was quiet for a long time, watching his new wife laugh across the room. She looked up, caught his eye, and blew him a theatrical kiss. The gesture, meant to be loving, suddenly looked grotesque, a performance for the crowd. Thank you, Clara, he whispered, his voice thick with a sorrow that was just beginning to take root. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and put the polite groom's smile back on his face. But as he walked back to the head table, he looked like a man walking to his own execution. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the wedding might be perfect, but the marriage was already over. After Julian returned to the head table, the atmosphere of the wedding, at least for the four of us who knew the truth, had been irrevocably fractured. I watched him from my alcove. He sat beside Serafina, a polite, vacant smile fixed on his face. He picked up his fork but didn't eat. He listened to her chatter, nodding at all the right moments, but his eyes were distant and cold. He was a shell, a handsome, well-dressed man whose soul had just been scooped out on his wedding day. Serafina, completely oblivious, continued to play the part of the radiant bride. She was in her element, the center of attention, unaware that her perfect world was about to shatter. She would occasionally lean over and whisper something in Julian's ear, expecting a loving smile in return. Instead, she would get a tight, brief nod. I could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Julian wasn't performing his role correctly. He was failing in his duty as her adoring groom. I saw Beatrice Sterling watching them both. She sat at the parents' table, a portrait of calm composure, but her eyes never left her son. She saw his pain, his disillusionment. I knew she wouldn't let it stand. A few minutes later, during a lull between the main course and the speeches, she stood up and made her way over to me. "Clara," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Will you come with me? I think it's time." She didn't need to explain what it was time for. I simply nodded and stood up, my legs feeling a little unsteady. We walked together toward the head table. As we approached, Julian looked up, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, dread, but also a sliver of relief. Beatrice spoke to him in a low voice. "Julian, we need to talk privately." Serafina looked up, her fork full of wedding cake halfway to her mouth. "What's going on? Where are you going?" she demanded, a spoiled child's whine in her voice. "We'll be right back, Serafina," Beatrice said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She put a hand on her son's shoulder, and together, the three of us walked away from the head table, leaving Serafina staring after us, her perfect smile replaced by a confused pout. Beatrice led us out of the ballroom, down a quiet carpeted hallway to a small private room the hotel kept for intimate meetings. It was furnished like a study, with leather armchairs, dark wood paneling, and a small unlit fireplace. It was silent and felt miles away from the manufactured joy of the party. "Sit down, both of you," Beatrice said gently. Julian sank into one of the armchairs, resting his elbows on his knees and burying his face in his hands. I remained standing near the door, feeling like an intruder in this deeply personal moment of a stranger's crisis. Beatrice didn't sit. She stood in the center of the room and pulled out her phone. The screen cast a pale blue light on her face. "Julian?" she began, her voice filled with a mother's sorrow. "I know this is the worst day of your life to be having this conversation, but I can't let you walk into your future blind. I've had my suspicions about Serafina for months now. Her attitude, the way she speaks about people, it never sat right with me." She looked at me for a moment. "I'm sorry to involve you in this, Clara, but you deserve to know that you are not the only one she does this to." She turned the phone toward Julian. He slowly lifted his head, his face pale and drawn. "A few weeks ago," Beatrice continued, "I was helping her address invitations. She left her laptop open while she took a phone call. A message popped up on the screen. I know I shouldn't have looked, but I had a terrible feeling. What I saw? It confirmed my fears. She had taken pictures of the screen with her phone. Now she swiped through them, showing them to her son. From where I stood, I could see the familiar shape of a social media chat window. I saw Serafina's profile picture next to a string of messages. Julian took the phone from his mother's hand. He stared at it, his knuckles white. I watched his face as he read. I saw the last vestiges of hope drain out of him. I saw the disbelief harden into a look of utter devastation. He was reading the unvarnished thoughts of the woman he had just promised to love for the rest of his life. His thumbs scrolled slowly, moving from one screenshot to the next. Beatrice narrated quietly, her voice devoid of any triumph. Only sadness. "These are messages to her maid of honor," she said. Julian was reading a text where Serafina was complaining about a tie he had chosen, calling his taste pathetically suburban. Another one mocked him for getting emotional during their vows, calling him her adoring puppy dog who would do anything she wanted. Then came the emails. An exchange between Serafina and my mother, Victoria. They were discussing Beatrice herself. Serafina had called her a controlling witch and made fun of the dress she had chosen for the wedding, the very dress she was wearing now. My mother's replies were full of laughing emojis, encouraging the cruelty, bonding with her favorite daughter over their shared disdain. Finally, there was the last message, the one Beatrice had first seen on the laptop. It was to a friend from college, a woman I knew Serafina considered a rival. It was a message of pure, triumphant bragging. Julian read it out loud, his voice a dead, hollow monotone. "He's completely besotted. I'll have access to everything once the ink dries on that marriage certificate. The trust fund, the house in Aspen, all of it. Honestly, a few years of pretending to be interested in his boring work is a small price to pay." He stopped. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint thumping bass of the music from the party down the hall. Julian slowly lowered the phone. He stared at the empty fireplace, his expression now completely blank. The devastation had burned away, leaving behind something cold and empty. He had been played. His love, his trust, his future. It had all been part of a long con. And the woman he loved was the con artist. I felt a wave of sickness. This was my sister. My family. This was the poison I had grown up with. And now it had infected this good, kind man. There was a strange, terrible vindication in it. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just a jealous sister. The cruelty was real. And now, here was the proof, glowing on a phone screen in a quiet hotel room. Undeniable and absolute. The silence in the study was heavy and suffocating. Julian stood up, his movements stiff, robotic. He handed the phone back to his mother. His face was like a stone mask, all emotion carefully locked away. "I need to speak with them," he said, his voice flat. "Serafina and your parents. Clara. I need them in this room now." Beatrice simply nodded. She knew better than to argue. She left the room, a woman on a mission, leaving me alone with her heartbroken son. He paced the small room back and forth like a caged animal. He didn't say anything, and I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," felt pathetic and useless. A few minutes later, The door opened. My mother, Victoria, walked in first, her face a mask of anxious concern. My father, Edward, followed her, his expression weary, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He avoided my eyes. Finally, Serafina stormed in. The bride. Her face was flushed with anger, her white dress seeming to suck all the light from the room. What is the meaning of this? She snapped, her eyes landing on Julian. Pulling me away from my own wedding? And what is she doing here? She shot a look of pure venom in my direction. Clara, I swear if you've done something to ruin my day. Be quiet. Serafina, Julian said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through her tirade like a whip. She stopped, her mouth hanging open, shocked that he would ever use that tone with her. Victoria immediately stepped forward, playing the part of the peacemaker. Julian, darling, let's all just calm down. There must be a terrible misunderstanding. Weddings are so stressful. There is no misunderstanding, Beatrice said, stepping back into the room and closing the door behind her. She stood beside her son, a united front. She held up her phone. There is only the truth. She didn't need to show them the messages again. The look on her face, on Julian's, was enough. I saw the flash of recognition and pure panic in my mother's eyes. Serafina paled, her blustering anger deflating into fear. They were caught. Those could be fake, Serafina stammered, grasping at straws. Clara probably faked them. She's always been jealous of me. She's trying to destroy my happiness. My mother latched onto the new narrative immediately. That's right. Clara has always been a difficult, jealous child. Julian, you can't believe her. She's making all of this up. They were a team, a well-oiled machine of denial and blame. They turned on me, their eyes full of hatred because I was the easiest target. I was the family scapegoat. It was the role I had played my whole life. I braced myself for the onslaught, for Julian to be confused, for this to devolve into the same old chaotic family argument where I was always the villain. But before I could even open my mouth to defend myself, a voice I had almost never heard in a moment of conflict spoke. That's enough, Victoria. Everyone froze. We all turned to look at my father. Edward had always been a quiet, passive man. His strategy for survival in our family was to stay silent, to not get involved. He avoided conflict, smoothed things over, and let my mother and Serafina have their way. Always. He stood by the door, his shoulders slumped, looking older than I had ever seen him. He was looking at Serafina, at the ugly desperation on her face, and then at my mother. Her expression twisted with frantic deceit. Then, his eyes met mine. For the first time, I saw not just exhaustion, but a profound, bottomless shame. He took a deep breath. Clara's been right all along, he said. The words were quiet, but they landed in the silent room with the force of a bomb. The world stopped. My mother stared at him, her mouth agape, as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. Serafina looked at him with pure betrayal. It was one thing for outsiders to turn on her, but for her father, her quiet, enabling father, to side with me, it was unthinkable. For me, it was as if the ground had suddenly solidified beneath my feet after a lifetime of walking on quicksand. He saw it. He had always seen it. He had been silent, he had been complicit in his silence, but he had seen it all. He had seen the trophies in the closet. He had known about the leather notebook. He had seen every slight, every casual cruelty, every single moment I was made to feel invisible. And now, in this room, on this day, he was finally saying it out loud. Clara's been right all along. It was the validation I had stopped hoping for years ago. It was absolution. It was everything. The room was deathly quiet. The six of us frozen in a tableau of shattered lies. My father had finally spoken the truth, and the sound of it breaking was the only thing you could hear. My father's quiet confession hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the illusion shattered completely. Serafina let out a sound that was somewhere between a scream and a sob. The mask of the sweet, wronged bride fell away, revealing the furious, ugly reality beneath. Her face contorted, her eyes wild with rage. "You," she shrieked, pointing a trembling diamond-clad finger at my father. "How could you? You're my father. You're supposed to be on my side." She then whirled to face me, her tulle skirt swishing around her like a storm cloud. "And you have been waiting for this your entire life. Haven't you? You miserable, jealous snake. You could never stand to see me happy. You've been plotting to ruin this day for me since the moment Julian proposed." Her accusations were a torrent, a chaotic flood of venom and blame. She accused Julian of being a weak, pathetic mama's boy who believed a few faked text messages over his own wife. She accused Beatrice of wanting to sabotage the wedding from the beginning because she never thought Serafina was good enough for her precious son. She was a cornered animal, lashing out at everyone, trying to drag the entire world down with her. My mother tried to rush to her side to soothe her, but Serafina shoved her away. "Don't touch me. You let this happen." Throughout this tirade, Beatrice remained perfectly still. She watched Serafina's meltdown not with anger, but with a kind of clinical calm. When Serafina finally paused to take a ragged breath, Beatrice's voice cut through the tense air, cool and clear. "We finally see you clearly, Serafina," she said. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement of fact, a diagnosis. It was the calm, quiet truth against which Serafina's frantic lies shattered. Serafina opened her mouth to scream again, but no sound came out. She looked at Julian, her eyes pleading now, trying one last time to find her ally. her adoring groom. But the man looking back at her was a stranger. His face was filled with a profound, quiet sorrow. He looked at this raging, screaming woman in the extravagant white dress, and he saw nothing of the person he thought he loved. The girl he had fallen for was a fiction, a carefully crafted role, and the actress had just broken character in the most spectacular way possible. He whispered it, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it. But the words were devastating. "I don't even know who you are." That was it. That was the final blow. The realization that she had lost him completely, that her greatest performance had failed, finally broke her. She crumpled into a chair, her rage collapsing into shuddering, theatrical sobs. My mother rushed to her side, stroking her hair, glaring at the rest of us as if we were monsters who had attacked her innocent child. All eyes turned to me. I could feel them waiting for my final triumphant speech, waiting for me to list all the grievances, all the years of pain, to finally have my pound of flesh. But I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The hurt was gone. All I felt was a vast, quiet emptiness, a sense of an ending. I looked at my sobbing sister, a woman who had built her entire life on a foundation of lies and manipulation. And I didn't feel hatred. I felt a distant, detached pity. Her perfect day was in ruins. Her perfect future was gone. And she had no one to blame but herself. I looked at her, my voice as steady and calm as Beatrice's. "You did this to yourself, Serafina," I said. There was no anger in my words, no victory. It was just the truth. You ruined this. I just stopped pretending with you. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to make a scene. The lie had been the family's shared project for decades. And all I had to do to bring it all down was to stop holding up my corner. After I said those final words, I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing left to say. The truth was out, lying in the middle of the room like shattered glass. And it was not my job to clean up the mess. My only job now was to leave. I turned my back on all of them. On my sobbing sister, my frantic mother, my shame-faced father, and the heartbroken groom and his resolute mother. I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway. The thick, soundproofed door clicked shut behind me, sealing their chaos in the room. I was back in the quiet, carpeted corridor. I started walking, my steps feeling impossibly light. I walked past the entrance to the grand ballroom. I could hear the band had started playing a cheerful swing number. I could see the guests through the doorway. Some were on the dance floor. Others were eating the 7-tiered wedding cake, all of them smiling and laughing, completely oblivious to the implosion that had just occurred in a small room down the hall. The entire wedding felt like a ghost ship, a grand, beautiful vessel with no one at the helm, sailing on into the night. I continued down the hall, back toward the entrance. And there it was, my seat. The single, lonely chair tucked away by the coat racks. The place card with my name on it was still sitting on the seat. a perfect little monument to my family's cruelty. I stopped and looked at it. A week ago, a day ago, even an hour ago. Seeing that chair would have filled me with a fresh wave of humiliation and pain. But now, it looked different. It no longer felt like an insult. It felt like a signpost, a marker on a map pointing me toward the exit. It was the catalyst. It was the clumsy, cruel act that had finally set me free. Without this chair, I would have taken my seat at a table, eaten the dry chicken, and smiled through the toasts. I would have kept pretending. I almost laughed. In her attempt to publicly erase me, Serafina had given me the one thing I desperately needed, a reason to stop playing the game. I didn't touch the chair. I left it there. I walked over to the coat rack, found my simple cloth coat among the furs and cashmere, and slipped it on. I walked out of the grand hallway, through the hotel lobby with its glittering chandeliers and hushed conversations, and pushed open the heavy glass doors. The cool, damp Chicago night air hit my face. It smelled of rain and exhaust fumes and freedom. The sounds of the city, a distant siren. The rumble of the L train. The murmur of traffic were a welcome relief after the suffocating atmosphere of the wedding. I stood on the pavement for a moment, just breathing. I felt empty, but it wasn't a bad emptiness. It was a clean, peaceful emptiness. The space that had been filled for 28 years with anxiety, with resentment, with the constant, exhausting effort of trying to earn my family's love, was finally vacant. I had room to breathe. My heels clicked against the marble steps and then onto the concrete sidewalk. The sound was crisp and clear in the night air. Each step took me further away from the ballroom, further away from the lies, further away from the life I was supposed to have. I didn't know where I was going. Exactly. I just knew I was walking away. I wasn't running. I was walking calmly, deliberately. I didn't stay for the first dance. I didn't stay for the fake toasts or the cutting of the cake. I didn't stay to watch the wreckage. I was leaving it all behind. For the first time in my life, I felt no obligation to stay and fix things, to smooth things over, to manage everyone else's feelings. My revenge wasn't a big dramatic scene. It wasn't a triumphant speech. It was the quiet sound of my own footsteps walking away. It was my silence. It was my absence. For the first time, I felt completely and utterly free. It's been 6 months since the wedding that wasn't. I live in a new city now. In a small apartment with big windows that let in the morning light. I'm still an architect, but the buildings I design feel different, more honest. I don't talk to my mother or my sister. My father calls me sometimes, his voice quiet and sad. We're slowly, carefully, trying to build something new. Julian, I heard, had the marriage annulled within weeks. I hope he's found some peace. I think about that night sometimes. I think about the chair by the coats and the look on my father's face when he finally told the truth. I've learned that some family ties aren't bonds of love, but chains of obligation. And sometimes, the only way to save yourself is to break them. I've realized that the opposite of love isn't hate. It's indifference. and walking away not with a furious slam of the door, but with the quiet dignity of your own footsteps is the most powerful statement you can ever make. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't loud. It's leaving quietly, knowing your worth. My whole life, I thought I needed my family to see me, to acknowledge that I existed. But in the end, the only person who needed to see me was me. If you've ever been the invisible one, the afterthought, the keeper of secrets in a family that refuses to see the truth, I see you. If you're listening to my story and it feels familiar, I want you to know you are not alone. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and share this video to help me grow. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. You are not forgotten.